The fact is that such technologies exist, and we have access to many similar technologies.
From our perspective, it's the most revolutionary energy machine in the world. We have invested several million in development.
There is access to space energy today, meaning free energy. One can talk about neutrino energy or its various forms. The trick is simply to collect these small energy packets and manifest them in a device. How can water be obtained from the air? There are many options.
When you switch off the machine, the process continues. We want to build such units for home use.
Now these technologies are supposed to come to Europe, probably first to Germany, then to Switzerland, and so on. Of course, the question arises, should an inventor simply release their invention into the market? The inventor's work is maybe only 5%, while everything else is to introduce it into society.
So whoever has free energy has the power, and yet this would also mean giving power to the people.
Today we are pleased to welcome the founders of Jupiter Publishing House. Founded back in 1988. Since December 1996, you have been editors of the prestigious NET Journal, Journal of New Energy Technologies, and in 2009, you founded the Swiss Association for Spatial Energy, SVR for short. I am very pleased to have Inge and Adolf Schneider with us today. Jupiter Publishing House is well known for its publication of books, brochures, and conference proceedings that cover conventional energy and propulsion technologies. They are also the editors of the bi-monthly NET Journal, available by subscription, offering a wide range of content, including up-to-date table of contents and exciting reading samples. In this interview, we will learn more about the inspiring work of Inge and Adolf Schneider, as well as the fascinating topics they have been researching and covering for over 35 years in NET Journal, as well as in their own publishing house. The first question: how and when did you first become interested in free energy and free energy generators? What was your initial motivation, and what continues to drive you to study this topic together for already 38 years?
We're pleased to have the opportunity today to share a bit about the history of free energy from our perspective. It's worth mentioning that both of us have been interested in this topic even before we met. For example, since the 1970s, I knew Professor Dr. Hans Nieper in Germany, who in the 1980s held significant conferences in Hanover and wrote an interesting book titled Revolution in Technology, Medicine, and Society. He was a renowned oncologist and cardiologist, but he also had a great interest in physics, especially gravitational field energy. In the early 1980s, he founded a society on this topic, which then extensively researched space energy. And that was actually the common ground where we exchanged information.
It's interesting that we're currently in the Technopark, and Dr. Thorsten Ludwig will hold a lecture. He is the president of the German Association for Space Energy. So he's actually the successor to Dr. Hans Nieper. Thus, what began with our acquaintance with Dr. Nieper continues to this day. We stay in touch with all organizations related to space energy. Because, as you said, we founded the Swiss Association for Space Energy. In Switzerland, there is also the Swiss Working Group on Free Energy. The term free energy is used there. And at some point in these associations, they decided to use the term space energy instead of free energy. Before we met, I first learned about free energy back in 1984 when I visited the only functioning free energy machine at that time, called the Testatica, located in the religious community of the Mathernita in Emmental. Together with physicist Dr. Hans Weber, I saw this machine in action. It put out approximately 300 watts. But at that time, there were also more powerful devices that independently produced 1 kilowatt of energy or even more. And a load was also applied there. For example, a drill, a heater, lamps, so that you could see it directly. An inventor, Paul Baumann, set 2 wheels rotating in opposite directions, thus creating an electrostatic field that then could be used to extract energy through the so-called plates. Let me jump ahead a bit. We published a book called Testatica and Other Free Energy Devices, and it essentially describes everything related to this energy machine. But I would like to mention that Dr. Hans Weber and I was amazed by this energy machine. We heard rumors about the existence of free energy and autonomous energy devices before, but we had never seen one ourselves. Especially he, as a nuclear physicist, who at that time held a responsible position at the Federal Institute of Nuclear Physics, spontaneously decided to leave it. He turned down a very lucrative position and then founded the first Bionics Institute in the city of Bruck, thus doing backbreaking work. He was unable to recover and unfortunately died too soon. But he dedicated his life to free energy. And when we met, we both decided to dedicate our lives and our work to free energy study as well. Because there is nothing that has more radiance, even in the spiritual realm. Being a Christian, I always mention the divine aspect, the access to the divine realm. And this simply brings an incredible radiance to the whole thing. But one can also harness this energy technically, and that is what we're interested in.
Our listeners may also be very interested in the question, what do you mean by free energy?
Approximately 15 years ago, Klaus Jebens wrote a book called An Elemental Force from the Universe, which explains the term free energy as the elemental force from the universe. His father, Heinrich Jebens, drove a Tesla car back in 1931 and told his son about it. Then he published that. We also republished this book in our publishing house, this time together with the second part about the Tesla car, called the Primordial Universal Force. This is essentially primary energy that everything consists of. There is nothing without the primordial force. At present, this force, this energy, can be technically transformed and used.
Yes, the most interesting thing is that we constantly see new developments coming up. We keep in contact with researchers worldwide, especially in the USA, as well as in other countries. Additionally, we made many trips to these countries and published these interviews in the NetJournal. as NET stands for New Energy Technologies. We also maintain good relations with the Russian representatives of free energy in St. Petersburg. In the early 2000s, he also published a journal, which was also called New Energy Technologies, featuring very interesting developments from Russia. There are indeed amazing research efforts worldwide. And one always has a feeling, yeah, this is really unknown area. Is it true or not? By profession, I'm an electrical engineer with a solid physics understanding. And of course, I can assess and classify many things. And when we see devices that supposedly have special properties, both of us naturally want to investigate that very carefully. And for this, we also have measuring devices and other stuff. But as I mentioned earlier, the NET Journal, which we have been publishing since 1996, covers a wide range of topics, including particularly notable and interesting developments in solar and wind energy. For example, how can water be obtained from the air? There are many options, but the questions are always the same. What is the cost? Is it worth it? Will it pay off? We also receive these questions from our readers. So, free energy machine, if it's ever available for purchase, will it pay off? And we can confidently say that's not a problem at all, because modern technologies are not always available. Solar energy is intermittent, and the wind isn't constantly blowing. When you calculate the payback period, it usually doesn't look very impressive, especially if there are no government subsidies. That was an overview of what we do in the NET Journal. Of course, we also publish many of these materials in books. We have a list of books available at Jupiter Publishing. There's a link there by which you can get more information.
We've been organizing congresses since 1988. So far, there have been about 80 congresses and conferences in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, including seminars, some of which were practical, where devices were reproduced according to drawings and schematics. And these are simply research efforts which were also documented in the NET Journal. So we have a small group where all processes are described in detail. All ideas can be brought to life. Then all the work is documented in detail again. And ultimately, the devices become tangible objects. Our task is not limited to just writing about such technologies, but also bringing them to life and promoting already developed devices so they can emerge and reduce the ecological burden that our planet experiences due to modern technologies. To make such technologies tangible, we have founded various companies, although not all of them exist anymore, as it is always associated with economic issues. In the context of economic development, I would like to mention that we have invested several million in development, travel, and inventors. It's just a very costly endeavor. That's why not all the companies we founded still exist. However, the company Over Unity, located in Zug, still exists. And as its name suggests, Over Unity, that's precisely what it is. These are devices that generate more than 100% energy.
It might sound utopian, but it's not. Because anyone who, for example, has a heat pump in their house knows, or they can be informed that such an energy machine produces more energy than it consumes. A conventional heat pump requires 1/3 of electrical or other energy, and a special heat pump is only 1/6. And our goal, of course, is to expand this Over Unity theme to other technologies. And this is not our idea. It exists everywhere. We've already described this. My wife has seen this Testatica device. And of course, it creates an overunity in the sense that they operate independently. And of course, one can say that if you have an overunity factor of 3 or 4, then you can basically, which is clear to everyone, loop a portion of the output energy in a suitable form, perhaps buffered through a battery system to bring energy back to the input. The question always arises, where does the energy come from? We're often accused of working on creating a perpetual motion machine, which cannot be patented, etc. But that's not the case. We have researched it ourselves and know from many researchers that there is access to space energy today, meaning free energy. One can talk about neutrino energy or its various forms. There are numerous types of radiant energy swirling everywhere. The trick is simply to collect these small energy packets and manifest them in a device.
I would like to add, of course, there is a difference between a heat pump, which precisely obtains its energy from heat, and so-called devices with the overunity efficiency, which extract their energy from an unknown energy field, the energy of quantum and vacuum fields. Professor Tudor talks about the energy of the vacuum field. That's the difference. The task becomes more complicated because you cannot prove it in the same way as the function of a heat pump. But we want to deal precisely with this.
Free energy encompasses a wide range of different forms of energy. Therefore, it's not so easy to understand. For example, in 1989, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons discovered the so-called cold fusion phenomenon and built devices that operated autonomously and extracted energy from atomic realms without producing radiation. At that time, it was believed that nuclear energy exists, but it is always accompanied by radioactive contamination, and it is only possible with uranium, etc. But for decades, there have also been known transmutation processes studied by many physicists. There are researchers from all over the world in this field, with whom we stay in touch. This is also free energy. Free energy means that it is available freely, without the need for great effort. For example, Malcolm Bendall developed his own plasma physics. He personally knew Fleischmann and Pons and is familiar with the whole situation. The only recent devices based on cold fusion, today also known as low-energy technology, are not used everywhere, is that the global physics community bet on hot fusion because it generates billions in revenue and employs tens of thousands of professors and specialists. It's like a large ocean liner. It can't suddenly be stopped because, in that case, a lot of money will be wasted. The same thing happens in many other sectors of the economy. This means that we need to find ways to smoothly introduce new technologies or new forms of technology into the economy. We'll talk about this topic in more detail later.
This is very interesting. We're also very interested in tachyons. And in this regard, the question arises, what are tachyons and what is the energy of tachyons? From your publications, we have concluded that the energy of the gravitational field, cosmic energy, the energy of tachyons, and Tesla's ether energy are all the same or identical forms of energy? Or have we misunderstood something?
Yes, I'll talk about tachyon energy a little later. But perhaps I'll add something about the Tesla car. Of course, in those times, there were no Tesla cars as we know them today. Modern Tesla cars operate in a completely conventional manner using electric motors and consequently require a large battery.
Professor Miel said, it says Tesla on it, but it's not Tesla inside.
Yes, that can be explained that way. There are many reports, more or less verified, There is undoubtedly some truth in them. That in 1931, Tesla converted a car to electric drive. It's nothing special, as such cars already existed at that time. But he developed his own amplifier with special electrical circuits and his own antenna, which apparently captures some energy from space or the ether and charge the batteries. Thus, the car could travel several hundred kilometers. This story, as my wife mentioned, is detailed in our book, The Elemental Force of the Universe, which we recently republished. Let's return to the tachyon energy. The term tachyons often appeared in mass media and alternative media in the 1980s. And one of those who used this term was Dr. Nieper. Tachyons are hypothetical particles that travel faster than the speed of light. But as we know from Albert Einstein, there are actually no particles, no mass, that can move at the speed exceeding the speed of light. However, this topic opens up room for speculation. But what is known, at least today, that there's neutrinos. Neutrinos also have mass and in certain mediums, such as graphene materials. They can excite the graphene and thus the atoms to vibrate and release energy. Of course, it is extremely small, but if you multiply it by stacking a lot of layers, which are atomic, meaning extremely thin, then we can obtain some amount of energy. And this is one type of energy of the future. Of course, there are also other types of energy in the environment that can be collected and concentrated.
You've probably seen a lot of different technologies over the years of your research, journalism, and work with the public. Will you please tell us about the most effective methods that you fondly remember?
First and foremost, we have seen magnetic motors. For example, Muammer Yildiz, a Turkish inventor, whose magnetic motor we firstly saw, I think, in 2006, and we saw it in operation in 2008. Actually, he didn't make much progress because he had incredible ideas about funding. His magnetic motor obviously works. He presented it again in Izmir in December 2022. We were present there. We also wrote a report about it in the Net Journal. The magnetic motor generated about 300 watts and could power loads, such as a fan, which operated from the magnet. But at the moment, the inventor is not moving forward, mainly because of his ideas about financing. There is another magnetic motor from Dennis Danzig of the Inductance Energy Corporation, IEC, which we saw in Scottsdale in 2019. We also saw it in operation at a facility in Las Vegas, where it was used to generate energy for the enterprise of one of the shareholders. Additionally, we saw about 24 magnetic motors at various stages at the IEC plant in Scottsdale, and then received a record of energy produced over several months. I wrote a brochure about our visit to Las Vegas and Scottsdale. Perhaps Dennis Danzig will give a lecture at our Congress in Stuttgart. This technology has its drawbacks, particularly very heavy flywheels, but this magnetic motor operates completely in standalone mode.
Denis Denzik also uses neodymium magnets, if you're familiar with them, but specially developed ones, not those from China, but so-called asymmetric ones. He developed a completely unique geometric configuration that allows to generate 25 kilowatts of energy with a minimum energy outlay of around 300 watts. But of course, there are other magnet motor technologies as well. We have been in contact with Holcomb Company in Florida for some time now. This company is represented by a stock association in San Diego and is currently being actively promoted at the world level. We know the shareholders and licensees who are eager to bring this technology to market.
We've invested a six-figure amount into the technology and brought investors into the company. One of the investors is planning to start production quite soon. So we think this is a breakthrough. Production may not start so quickly, but the devices are ready for mass production. They're already being produced in the USA, albeit manually. Now the goal is to establish mass production. This will be done for the first time in Germany, thanks to the contact we've facilitated. We're considering whether we should become active in Switzerland. We still need to evaluate the production possibilities available to us there.
So there are various documents and links available on this topic, which all provide so that one can read through all the patents. It's going to be an exciting story. At the moment, they are, well, it's worth mentioning that up until 2017, they were involved in developing magnetic motors that function like regular engines. In 2017, the inventor came up with the idea of how to practically create a virtual field. Essentially, it's a rotating field like in conventional engines, but without the rotor actually spinning. That means we now have a device that looks like a transformer, but provides energy amplification of a factor of 2 to 8. And the most fantastic thing is that it utilizes a very specific magnetic effect, which I immediately recognize, since both of us attended a lecture by Dr. Folkrot in Zurich in 1986, where he presented his development. He patented this invention after discovering, being an expert in magnetic technologies, that when demagnetizing magnetic material, you get more energy out than you initially put in. It's a so-called domino effect, where Weiss domains fold over each other. Energy comes from the quantum field, meaning there's additional energy coming in. This is similar to Holcomb technology, and since there's a large amplification effect, it's naturally possible. As I've mentioned before, we need to strive for autonomous solutions. Autonomous devices have already been built in Florida. They still have some technical problems to solve with special types of relays and batteries. They need specific batteries, preferably graphene ones, the latest innovation from China, which do not heat up at high currents. All this will happen, but at the moment, what is interesting is the so-called ILPG, inline power generators, which have already been installed for a number of customers. Now these technologies are supposed to come to Europe, probably first to Germany, then to Switzerland, and so on. We'll see.
Dear Inge, please tell us about the experiment with the tachyon motorcycle that you rode yourself. In the course of our research, we learned interesting facts, and there's a particularly valuable point in the results that have been achieved. Was this experiment officially registered? As we know, you not only rode this motorcycle, but also conducted the research yourself.
Yes, I was a member of a Swiss working group that was studying these devices and developments, including Klaus Kruger's development. He collaborated with a German engineer whom we both knew independently of each other. Klaus Kruger was a medium, and I believe he was inspired to create this invention in a trance state. In 1982, the first Congress of the German Association of Gravity Energy took place in Hanover under the leadership of Dr. Hans Nieper. You weren't involved then, were you? This development was specifically presented there. He was also mentioned in the book Revolution in Technology, Medicine and Society, which we both independently read. And we were literally electrified by the possibilities of this energy. Its description was reflected in the book. And in 1983, as a member of this working group, I was able to ride this moped. We knew an engineer who supported Klaus Kruger and collaborated with him. Of course, it was an incredible experience, because until that moment, I had never ridden a moped. It was the first time I managed to ride one. It was truly unbelievable, because the moped didn't use fuel. It just rode.
It was an electric motor.
Yes, exactly. It was sort of charging itself. But I can't tell you exactly how that was happening. And it was a short ride, just a few hundred meters. But still, it was an incredible experience. There's even a photo somewhere of me with the moped. Unfortunately, I can't say anything more about it.
Thank you very much. We know that you have been actively involved with water engines for cars for some time, especially in recent years, and water engines in general. Please tell us about this research and the technology itself. What results can you report?
In 2017, we saw the book The Water Engine by José Vázquez-Guillén on the internet. At the time, it was only available in Spanish. He was delighted when we got in touch with him. He said that he was actually looking forward to feedback from the world, from people who would translate his book into other languages. And then we translated it into German. And he actually described quite precisely how you can fill up a water moped. It wasn't a water car, it was a water moped with water. We should also mention that he built it in Brazil, and there are other fuels there. He used water and some vegetable oil. Sometimes these are combinations that are not so easy to obtain here or difficult to implement. But the thing is, then we translated this book and added the first part from our experience. And there are many developments of water engines, starting with Gelen, for example, with Stanley Meyer, who, by the way, we actually knew personally. And he indeed drove a water-powered car. We later followed the further development through Walter Jenkins. I think he's still working on it, but he hasn't brought it to market yet. There are countless interesting inventions, and we also collaborate with Professor Theo Almeida Murphy. He's on the Scientific Research Advisory Board of our editorial team. And he has even presented several times at a congress that 95% water can be nebulized with 5% petrol to create a new fuel. And he says that this could be used as fuel for cars. But he simply doesn't do it for political reasons. Last year, we had contact with a Serbian group of inventors who had invented a water engine, i.e. an electrolysis process where you mainly mix water with fuel and then create a self-running engine. Then we met them in Serbia and also saw a car there that was mainly powered by water, around 80 to 90%. In other words, the car drove 5,000 kilometers on a full tank of petrol and was mainly powered by water. Then we decided to collaborate with these inventors, as they had just invented a highly efficient electrolysis process that also uses, you would say, space energy, because otherwise it wouldn't be so highly efficient. We saw that electrolysis engine. It looks like this. This is the car that we also saw, which we bought here, a somewhat larger system. And the system we have has 12 cells that perform electrolysis. It is intended to be combined with a diesel generator set that would generate 400 kilowatts. So the whole combination generates 400 kilowatts, and it would save at least 60 to 70% of diesel fuel. And that is, of course, enormous. This system is located in our event hall in Schaffhausen and can be viewed by anyone. It can be put into operation, but we haven't installed a 400 kilowatt system, because that would be a huge machine. But you can see how electrolysis is going on there. It's interesting that when you switch off the machine, the process continues. So without electricity, the machine continues to produce hydrogen. Since we weren't able to try it for a long period of time, we asked the inventors, and they said that if you run the machine for 5 hours and then turn it off, the machine will continue running for another 5 hours or so without electricity, and it will produce gas that can be used.
So it looks like this. You simply pull the plug from the socket, then all the electronics are switched off, and yet hydrogen is still being produced. You can see this by the bubbles, and that's an effect that, to be honest, I haven't yet understood. However, we have carried out extensive measurements on the system, and it is quite clear that relatively complicated electronics are installed here. High-frequency pulses are produced here, very steep voltage pulses with a very short exposure time, and this pulse operation or impact on water apparently splits it into hydrogen and oxygen in a highly efficient way. They're similar technologies. So this one is a bit like Stanley Myers, who also worked with pulses. However, now we know of a company in New Zealand that is actually known worldwide. It is a really great website, and its devices have an efficiency from 20:1 to 50:1. 50:1 means 5,000%. In other words, it needs 1/50th of the energy to produce a corresponding amount of hydrogen and oxygen in terms of energy. This happens using a specific ion technology, which means that it manages to precondition the water with a specific circuit so that hydrogen and oxygen can be split much more easily. And this company actually wants to implement this worldwide. but is looking for a global corporation that can and wants to do this. And there is, of course, the question, no one has come forward yet. Is it opportune today to generate some energy in the countryside in the form of hydrogen, which then can easily be converted into electricity via fuel cell, which costs almost nothing? But this is a common challenge for everyone who implements it, for everyone who develops it, etc. So these are directly political and philosophical questions. But the fact is that such technologies exist, and we have access to many similar technologies.
What you just talked about is very interesting. So, is it a diesel engine?
From Serbia.
Do you have such a device at home?
No, we don't have one for 400 kilowatts.
We have reached an agreement with the Serbian inventors that we can build such devices. So the device we have in Schaffhausen, which anyone can see, is smaller. They've already operated 6.5 kilowatt generators. These generators serve as emergency power supplies using this electrolysis system. We want to build such units for home use, and this process is already underway. Currently, there are also plans to build a test unit, and then such devices can be mass-produced. That's actually the plan, and it is a mutually beneficial situation, because we have a huge demand for such equipment in Europe, Germany, and Switzerland. The Serbians have a much lower cost of labor than here, and they need jobs. We actually use these contacts for production. I've written an article on this topic, and here's what's interesting. Bill Gates is funding the development of conventional electrolysis with billions of euros and aims to bring hydrogen technologies to the world on a large scale. What he said about the development in New Zealand, with an efficiency reaching 5,000%, this is an entirely different world. These are two worlds, and this is just one example. I wrote an article in the Net Journal about how these two worlds currently do not intersect. This shows that capital is still trapped in profit-oriented structures. But it's worth mentioning that electrolysis hydrogen devices, which Bill Gates is currently promoting, are economically feasible only if subsidized or significantly financed by such investors. On their own, they're unprofitable, because hydrogen thus cannot be used economically. However, hydrogen can be efficiently produced using pulsed electrolysis. This leads to energy over unity effects, and you can achieve efficiency levels of 5,000%. However, these technologies are not yet scientifically acknowledged, and therefore they face challenges in gaining acceptance. I believe the New Zealand company is making a big mistake by bringing the technology to market in collaboration with a global corporation. That's the wrong path. We need to pursue decentralization, reaching out to ordinary people, rather than continuing to support a centralized energy system. We already wrote about this in the Net Journal in 2018, and now it's 2024, and no one has shown interest in them over these 6 years. I think this is simply the wrong path.
And that's exactly what you've just said, Adolf. Just imagine investing 1 billion, whether it's euros or dollars, in the right direction with an efficiency rate of 50%. That's something completely different. But again, we're returning to the financial aspect. That question is very important for people. In your opinion, are there available free energy generators that one can buy in a store and assemble themselves?
Not all free energy devices require special technology. I can tell you about Andrea Rossi's developments, the so-called ECAT energy catalyzers. He has been developing compact generators, SK LEFs, for several years, which produce 100 watts using a specific plasma process that is not easy to achieve and requires a certain level of technology expertise. But there are also other devices, like the Holcomb technology. They simply modify classical motors or generators, electric motors to be precise. In this case, only the rotor needs to be replaced. This method involves the use of unique magnetic plates, magnetic iron, and special windings, creating a special pulsating or rotating magnetic field, leading to a significant increase in energy output. You can buy all the materials needed, including copper wire and magnetic iron, and the rest is just a workflow. This should appear on the market in the near future. There are many similar technologies, such as the so-called buoyancy technology. These processes are basically purely mechanical, partially utilizing gravity, but there are also some other effects involved. However, no special material is needed. They are entirely ordinary things that can be bought anywhere. It all depends on specific configuration or construction, that is, on a certain level of knowledge. Of course, the question arises, should an inventor simply release their invention into the market without getting anything in return? Or should they sell licenses? Many believe that such technology should be open source. Indeed, that's possible today. Some say it's good when you can sell tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of blueprints for 200 to 300 euros or more, which is possible today via internet. Then the inventor will earn money and receive compensation for their work. So different strategies and structures exist, and time will tell which one will prevail.
What do you think about this? You've just mentioned that many free energy technologies not dependent on fuel or weather have existed for over 100 years, but still have not found wide application, and access to free energy remains restricted. What are the underlying reasons?
I believe the main reason lies in the current economic situation. That all these free energy devices would really turn upside down. Therefore, those in power are doing everything possible to prevent that from happening. And they're quite ingenious in choosing the mechanisms to prevent this from happening, up to assassination attempts. 20 years ago, two German inventors wanted to demonstrate a magnetic engine at one of our congresses, and apparently they were pushed off the road on the Autobahn by some other cars. They received a warning and did not come. There are a lot of such examples. We wrote about this in the book Towards the Era of Space Energy. In it, we gathered the best technologies described in the Net Journal since 1996 and told about what they were then and what has become of them today, why they were mostly not implemented. Mainly, it was due to financial reasons. Inventors couldn't finance their developments themselves, or investors stopped investing money at some point. By the way, the same thing happened with Tesla. JP Morgan stopped investing money at some point. Otherwise, today, we would have wireless energy transmission. There are speculations that this technology will come back. I don't think that's a good idea, because we should be moving towards decentralized energy systems, i.e., wireless energy transmission, rather than centralized ones, which are mostly controlled by energy companies. The thing is that free energy will truly turn everything upside down. Therefore, as you said, an absolutely smooth transition is necessary, starting with ordinary people. We need to work with ordinary citizens, with any person on the street, meeting their needs, not the needs of energy companies. Just focus on creating devices for the home first, to ultimately benefit the planet and reduce its burden.
What you said is very valuable. What benefits will the technology of obtaining free energy bring to people? And what prospects does it open up? Can you say something about this?
You should know that today, 1/3 of humanity, or even more, does not have access to electricity at all. I have often been to Nepal, India, and other countries. They still burn firewood, which they search for somewhere, in order to be able to cook food. Of course, with the help of free energy, we can improve living conditions and solve the problem of hunger. But as I said, energy is also key to the politics, which always has its own rules of the game. So the optimal solution, as my wife said, would be to spread the technology to ordinary people. Basically, we could start by creating and distributing very small power generators capable of charging, for example, just mobile phones. Just a few watts are needed, yet the benefits are immense. Then it will be possible to save billions of batteries, which are necessary today, but pose an environmental problem. There is also the SK-LEP generator by Andrea Rossi. These devices generate 100 watts. They resemble a small battery, and of course, they can be combined. It's even possible to combine them into a system with a capacity of 1 megawatt, thereby providing electricity for small businesses. So there's a lot of interesting things on the horizon. And we're confident that in a few months or years, that is, next year or the year after, a lot of new things will appear on the market in this field. And this, of course, will have an impact on the entire political and social situation. We can say that we're already at the point where major media outlets like Spiegel, New York Times, or Corriere della Sera will write about it. And in this regard, we are glad that there is an organization like the Creative Society.
Thank you very much. We are also honored to have the opportunity to have this interview. Could you share your opinion on responsibility? I would like to talk about this because possessing unlimited free energy naturally implies a high degree of responsibility. Do you think humanity is ready to bear this responsibility today?
If we want to wait until humanity is so-called mature, I mean, not everyone is mature yet, for we can't say we have the awareness and the others don't. But what about those who might have it? If we would say like that, judge like that, then we will never be able to introduce such technologies.
And who measures the level of maturity?
Yes, it's not so simple. There is another important criterion. It's the state of the planet, because it needs such solutions. That's why we're working in this direction. In one of the books, I can't remember exactly which one, Eureka Machine or another, I wrote about the so-called wooden hammer method. The method is that you create, produce, or develop devices, then you place them on the table, for example, for scientists, so that they cannot ignore them. In the end, they have to adapt their vision or scientific concepts, their physics. There is no other way. We can't wait for them to change their physics in order to then create devices. On the contrary, by creating such devices, we can change people's consciousness. And when they're placed in people's homes, the question will arise, how does this device generate electricity? And they will think about it. This will give an impetus for reflection and awareness, and will have a fruitful effect. But that doesn't mean we should elevate ourselves above people and say they lack awareness. And we should wait before introducing the technology.
And I think that's also valuable. You mentioned that if these technologies become accessible to people, and they're at home in the kitchen or somewhere else, then people will automatically talk about them. And there won't even be a need for those major publications if people start talking about technologies.
Yes, although it's not a bad thing if they write about it. You're not quite right when you say that the major newspapers, Spiegel, etc., shouldn't report on it. For example, the Wall Street Journal has already written about the IEC magnet motors in a very positive and pleasant manner. I quoted that in my brochure about the trip to the USA, so I think it's coming, and I'm quite confident about it.
And another question, is it possible to implement these free energy generators in the current format of the consumer society, or would we really have to think about changing the format first?
So then the question is about format. You mean the consumerist format of society. But how can you change it? You can't change it from the outside. And as my wife has said already, as soon as such devices appear in the supermarket or at the OBI, consciousness will automatically change. And that will also have an impact on social structures. We're pretty sure of that. And this is a process that will certainly take some time. But still, it is a process. It can, of course, have an explosive effect or expand. And on the subject of whether the major newspapers should or will write about such technologies, of course, we must also consider the following. If, for example, Bild, Der Blick, or other journals publish some sensational report about something like this, then of course, thousands of people will come and all want to buy one of these things. And then we can have the simple problem that they can't be produced so quickly. This means that the industry first has to create the capacity to make these things available. And there are some very interesting stories. For example, an American doctor, who years ago developed what you would call an electronic device that worked with plasma technology and had an output of 300, 500 watts up to 1 kilowatt. He had already prepared and built 20,000 devices in a factory and wanted to bring them onto the market in Japan in one fell swoop. That was Dr. James Schwartz, who is still alive today. And then he was suddenly stopped by the government on the pretext, which may be correct, that it was too dangerous because it wasn't safe enough. It might emit radiation if it wasn't operated properly, etc. In other words, in any case, reasons were given that are understandable as to why this cannot be done. This means that if you introduce such a technologies, of course it must be approved. It should have guarantees, etc. And that is not so easy. You can see it, for example, with water technology. We know a lot of people who have converted their engines to run more efficiently by installing an HHO electrolysis device and feeding HHO gas into the fresh air. This has an amazing effect of reducing exhaust emissions to almost zero. And if you have this measured in a service station or at the technical compliance inspection, then you have a problem that say, oh, my measuring device is broken. They can't be right. In other words, they're not yet prepared for such technologies. So you also have to plan the implementation very intelligently and strategically. The invention itself is only part of the process, and many people say the same thing. The inventor's work is maybe only 5%, while everything else is to introduce it into society.
This is where the next question arises. What could or should be changed in society so that these technologies can be introduced safely, i.e., without the threat of mass unemployment and the like?
Yes, my husband just said it is a gentle introduction, and I have already answered this question earlier. We can't change society. We can just change ourselves, or do it following the principle of Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." So we can only change ourselves and then try to bring these thoughts into the world. And for us, these are the technologies we want to introduce into the world that can bring about change. So we can't change society, but we can bring the technologies that will lead to changes. And what we're particularly concerned about is the environment.
And as we have said already, introduce them gently. In other words, you don't have to come up with autonomous devices that may be interesting, but which may not be cheap to implement. It's better to start with the devices that would reduce expenses. And there are many processes that can be used today to save, for example, fuel. And that's where we can start and then slowly raise awareness. Yes, we can still optimize it and we can still improve it. And after 2 or 3 years, other technologies will appear. And we have repeatedly encountered such a process in society. We can recall the first IBM computers, which were extremely large, very expensive, and cost many millions. And then gradually, their personal computer emerged, which was still relatively large, with a big screen. And today, everything is much smaller, reduced to the size of a mobile phone. This also happened gradually. The same path will probably have to be taken with free energy, and it is actually logical and optimal.
It depends on whether we're talking about an open source project. These are usually projects that have not been registered for a patent. The designs are open. Currently in Germany, there is such a project that emerged thanks to a particularly touching story from Jörg Bochian, the expert on exhaust gases. He developed HHO devices Initially, he studied Reinhard Kocher's book, Informational Energetics. I would say that Reinhard Kocher is a scholar of the new era. Based on this data, Jörg Wochian developed the concept of a free energy device, which Reinhard Kocher published in his book. He published what's called a schematic, by which one can assemble the device. Now it's an open source project. Jörg Wochian enthusiastically embraces informational energetics and has developed a plan of creating this device in cooperation with a group of researchers. At the previous Congress, he said he would like to use this Congress as a godfather to repeatedly show the device. Right now, it's in the development stage, and in a year, it will be at another level of progress. So we look forward to what he will present at the next Congress. This touches us deeply. This is collaboration. When it comes to negative forces, the deep state and others, they fear nothing so much as collaboration between friendly groups. And there's a lot we can do where they perhaps repeatedly reach a limit, but we don't. Our motivation is love and commitment to the planet, to the environment. This sustains us and our work and makes possible things that are impossible for negative forces. In reality, we feel great compassion for these forces because they always have to prove something. Perhaps they will have to mature as a result of the resistance they encounter. The question really concerns the project documentation. Either way, there are so-called open-source projects where schematics are available in open access, and anyone can reproduce them. Then groups are formed for assembly, or there are already patented technologies. Our company is actually focused on economic goals. We bought a license for a Russian technology and have already obtained project documentation, but that's confidential. This is Russian technology. From our perspective, it's the most revolutionary energy machine in the world, which we saw in Moscow in 2017 at the Russian Academy of Sciences. This device autonomously generates 1 megawatt using a process that is copied from the hydraulic ram, but extremely compressed. And unfortunately, this development, we obtained the license to have the ability to independently produce megawatt systems. We're also in contact with a German construction company that can build them. Simply, this process was interrupted by the war. Last year, we tried to transfer the remaining payment, but due to the war, the money was returned. Contact with the inventor was interrupted, and we're not making progress. But we're collaborating with a company that wanted to buy a sub-license from us and has already used the documents to develop their own project. This development is an alternative project based on the same foundation. We consider it incredibly brilliant how the potential sublicensee approached this issue using the documentation and available data, including through our book, Eureka Machine, Dr. Marukhin's Key to the Future of Energy. He found investors who invested 3 million euros to upload all available data, including patents, into a supercomputer and create a prototype that can then be mass-produced. And this is the perfect scenario. In fact, this is much better than Dr. Marukhin's original model. We just need to clarify the licensing issue, because otherwise it's a kind of plagiarism. We find ourselves caught between two fronts, but we want the development to continue. And I think there is a good chance that we'll allow Dr. Marukhin to participate in the project.
Our final question. In your opinion, how will the world change if science and technology serve the betterment of society? How will people's everyday lives change if everyone has unlimited energy?
Of course, this will have tremendous impact on all kinds of social and political processes. It's important to understand that different countries and regions of the world are very heterogeneous. This means that what may emerge or develop in one region, thanks to these new technologies, may not necessarily happen in the same way in other regions. This requires cooperation at the international level, which to some extent already exists between governments. But it should also come from the people. International organizations are necessary for this. Usually, we talk about the UN, but there are many others, such as the Creative Society, which, as we understand, has set this goal. And in this understanding, I have a feeling that the Creative Society will also develop creative solutions for introducing this new technology or accessing decentralized technology, which is especially important for developing countries where there are few or no centralized grids. For example, we're aware of the situation in Thailand, where we were a few years ago. Many mountain villages are completely cut off from power. If they get access to energy through new decentralized technologies, it will lead to a completely new level of development. And of course, everything will be better. We hope that people's consciousness will adapt to these changes and learn to use them.
You mentioned Thailand, so I'll go back to that. They have the technology. The government itself has funded and supported the technology, namely the Kinetic Power Plant, KPP, developed by Roche Innovations. There are already 100 kilowatt and 500 kilowatt devices in operation near Bangkok, tested by SGS and TUV inspection. This technology came from Germany, where the company was somewhat bullied, to put it mildly. They had no chance to survive here, but they already had contacts in Thailand with the royal family. We also had contacts and wanted to act as intermediaries, but the contacts turned out to be identical, so they already had the necessary connections. So the government ordered and apparently paid for such devices as 350 megawatt stations, which are equivalent to a part of a nuclear power plant.
It's like the Mühleberg nuclear power plant we have in Switzerland, which has been shut down for 2 years now.
Exactly, this technology exists. And I just want to mention, we also have a list of existing free energy devices, all published in our books and shared with politicians. I think something can still be done, but right now there's still an issue with politicians. However, I'm sure that it will all come through. And when common people start having such devices in their households, industrialists will come and say, yes, that would be great, we can finance and use it, and so on. So we're open to everything. And finally, what I wanted to point out at the beginning, this book about the true visionaries of our time was published in 2010 by Scorpio Publishing and was written by Martin Hausler. It discussed the topic of free energy. The book also features Dieter Brouwers, for example, who is a bioarchitect, a winner of the Alternative Nobel Prize, and other well-known personalities. We're very proud to have been included in this book. A large chapter about our life and work is included, providing deep insights into our lives. Not only have we worked tirelessly without sparing time, energy, and money, but have also lived in various conditions, in garages, in basements, just so we could keep working. And today we're doing somewhat better. I think we're at a good level now. Regarding your earlier question, what will happen if science, physics, and society start collaborating? The author answered himself. He said, what would the world look like tomorrow if such space energy technology were globally adopted? How would daily life be with those engines in the basements and in the cars that still seem strange to us? Entire industries would have to be reorganized. The import and export of oil, coal, and gas would become completely irrelevant or even unnecessary. There would no longer be a need for gas stations on highways, only rest areas. Countries that rely heavily on their GDP from resource extraction would be forced to re-equip. This stirs up fears because it would mean a loss of power. There is another quote that says, whoever has the energy has the power. And that's huge, isn't it? So whoever has free energy has the power. And yet, this would also mean giving power to the people.
What you've said at the end is most valuable. If every person has this energy source at home, then power will once again belong to the people. Thank you very much for your detailed answers, and I would like to thank you warmly once again. On behalf of our team, on behalf of our international society, many, many heartfelt thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you.